Hello and welcome to Very Much Earthed Arcana, where we talk some things tabletop gaming, other things Dungeons & Dragons, and all things in the first episode. Welcome to the first episode, everybody. I'm your host, Harrison Cordo, here to introduce you to my co-host, Matthew Easdale. Matt, how do you feel about starting the first episode?
I'm feeling pretty good. You know, having a coffee, woke up a couple hours ago, feeling good, ready to talk about some tabletop game in action.
Exactly. We are so ready to talk about tabletop gaming that we got all of the explanation of what the game is in the last episode. We started all that before. In the episode 0, I explained, what Dungeons & Dragons is, what homebrew is, and that's for the real normies that aren't used to Dungeons & Dragons. But if you're a normie, it's fine. We'll teach you the ways.
Hey, we were all normies once, so you got to be a normie before you can be a normie, whatever not a normie is.
Yeah, a gamer is the opposite of a normie. Yeah. But speaking of ways to start, our way of segueing into this podcast is talking about monk classes we are working on. So for the bulk of this podcast, our main sort of avenue for homebrew in this season of the podcast is using the tools of homebrew, the SRD, and other sort of terms that Dungeons & Dragons like the coin for, making your own content and making your own rules. What we're going to be doing over the entirety of this podcast is basically making our own homebrew book, episode by episode, creating an entire book full of comic book inspired subclasses for D&D 5e or Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. These are all kinds of different subclasses that will integrate right into the regular subclasses, just extra options for the regular classes like fighter, wizard, and monk, where we're going to be talking about this episode. I didn't want to go too crazy with making a class on our own, because that takes a lot of testing and a lot of extra things to take in account for, the type of play styles and what the lore and everything like that. So subclasses are the easiest way, because they are just 2 or 3 features that have a little bit of fun descriptors, but are pretty basic, just superpowers that a comic book inspired person could have. When I started writing this book about 3 years ago, I've been working on this book for about 3.5 years now. Hopefully we'll complete it on the 4th, but who knows? Maybe we'll be very due diligent. And also, like usual, pretty bad about posting podcasts weekly. We should be better about that, though. Yeah, I've been writing this book for about 3 years. I got the idea originally from making a Hulk inspired barbarian. It's just Hulk's very ragey. It'd be cool to not just go angry as a barbarian, but transform your entire body. And that spun into 30 plus subclasses I've been making over the years, inspired. So yeah, two or three subclasses per class in the game, D&D. And there's a lot of really cool ideas that I'm excited to share. But for now, let's just go into our 2 subclasses for monk. Monk being very spiritual, very dexterous, very fast, very quick, and very combat focused. Very proficient in combat. More specifically, melee combat. So I kind of worked
like a Shaolin monk, Jackie Chan kind of vibe. Usually is
exactly
the go-to kind of flavor that I think people tend to go to with monks.
Yeah, monks are intended to be just sort of a fantasy equivalent of just a magic martial artist. It utilizes, a lot of ki and a lot of just sort of movement to basically empower your body. And then later on, many sort of monk subclasses went for more magical sort of things. It basically started, the first subclass was Way of the Open Hand. You punch and kick very good. And then you can use this sort of magical force in the world called keys, basically centering your body's energy into your attack. But then that also translated to spells later on. You had Way of the astral projection. You have these massive astral arms that you can punch with. You have Way of the Elements. You have you can use elements kind of like Avatar, but very not good, because monks are notoriously nerfed, which is known as underpowered by Wizards of the Coast, the people who make the books for Dungeons and Dragons. The most recent example of this was a very cool subclass called Way of the Ascendant Dragon. This was basically you harness the power and fire of a dragon to use a bunch of cool elemental powers. It's basically Dungeons and Dragons first pitched this in their weekly release They have like this sort of newsletter called Unearthed Arcana, which is what the title of this podcast is based off of. They made a very cool, just sort of like dragon monk class where you can like hurl fire and like grow like these magic wings to like fly around whenever you use an ability called Step of the Wind. Every monk can like go faster, but some subclasses let you like fly around a little bit. And then when the official release of, actually have it right here, Bane's Treasury of Dragons, that was I think the latest book that D&D has released. That's the last one I got anyways. They underpowered the character compared to the initial Unearthed Arcana article. They made it less effective and harder to use, which is the story of the monk in general. You know, whatever cool ability they end up with, they eventually sort of backpedal on that a little bit. It's just like, oh, we don't want this like martial character to be too strong. Because like melee damage, that's also one of the reasons why I make my own rules for like a lot of like sort of martial prowess based classes for D&D, because they are very underserving to melee fighters, like strictly with your fists and your very good kicks. Wizards of the Coast really wants you to use weapons and magic and all that boring stuff instead of just having a good sock to the jaw for most of your combat. Matt, have you ever played a monk in your time with D&D?
I have not. No, I've played a couple martial characters. You know, my famous Grog, the Barbarian.
Very famous.
Is I think the only martial character I've actually played now that I think about it. But yeah, I've never played monk. I know in that campaign, our buddy Matt played a monk who was pretending to be a cleric.
Oh yes, Fainwell Dupeweaver.
Yeah. And in a different D&D campaign I played, I had someone else playing a monk, but I've never played one personally.
Yeah, it's always seemed to be a job for someone else until today. With these two subclasses, we are for sure going to inspire you to finally play the monk.
I will finally get off my anti-monk high horse that I will pretend to be on for this episode.
Exactly. You won't be a ridiculous sort of spellcaster or a lame weapon-wielding maniac.
Exactly. All I need is my two fists to beat up everyone on the Sword Coast.
Yes, and of course kicks. We have to require kicks.
I will do some kicking too.
Speaking of kicks, let's kick it over to our first subclass, the Way of the Spider, inspired by everyone's favorite web crawler, Spider-Man. I think I can say that legally in the podcast. That's like, yeah, this is similar to, you know, the web slingers of, you know, there's more than just, you know, Spider-Man. There's Spider-Man Noir. There's Spider-Ham, Peter Porker. There's Ghost Spider, which is a very odd rebrand of Spider-Gwen in the past few years. And they've been trying to push Miles Morales as the Arachna Kid in like toys and stuff, which I disagree with. Having just Spider-Man and Spider-Man is fine. But hey, I'm not a marketing guy. I'm a homebrew guy. And I am pretty proud of this homebrew. So yeah, let's just jump into it. So, and you can, of course, follow along with all these PDFs on patreon.com/vmearcana. I'm going to be posting the version 1s of all the PDFs we talk about on the podcast on there without any money. I'm not charging any money for Patreon stuff yet as we just sort of start the podcast. But yeah, that'll just be a good way to just read through all these PDFs because thanks to homebrewery.com, I've been able to format every PDF in a very D&D-like manner that I'm quite proud of.
Yeah, you had me fooled. When I first pulled these up, I was like, oh, are these pages from the D&D books? But then I read it and I was like, no, this sounds like Harrison wrote it.
Yeah. A little bit too much wordplay off the start here. So yeah, let's get some epic music in here and let's start reading from this PDF in a dramatic manner for the sake of podcasting. You are one of the chosen few that are indoctrinated into the Arachnality, a vast yet specific subset of the multiverse. The Arachnality, a set of realities that offers many powers, but contains many dangers. Filled to the brim with power that demands true responsibility, a very lucky few are brought in, or even raised in the order charged with its protection and study. Different arachnid realities have many different variables at play, but all have a uniting principle of spider-themed powers and selfless heroism. So yeah, that's a fun little flavor for the subclass. Every subclass in D&D has a very good introductory paragraph that you really got to nail down, and quite proud of that one. The arachnality, of course, plays on the Spider-Verse. I wanted to sort of make this subclass. I was racking my brain. A lot of people have different interpretations of Spider-Man. Monk makes the most sense to me because of like dexterity and all that good stuff, but a lot of people have pretty valid versions of their own homebrew where it's like a fighter that has webs, or like I think there was a pretty cool one that was like a sorcerer, to where like you were born with Spider-Man abilities that you just zip around and like cast webs and just describe them as just like a web that lights people on fire, or a web that like heals people, simple stuff like that. But I definitely wanted to keep it to like Spider-Man. Like you have a lot of web options, but the main sort of monk abilities of just like hopping around and like, punching better than most just really fits the character a little bit better. And like a Spider-Man with a sword, it's totally possible with this build as well. This doesn't stop you from doing that, but Spider-Man with a sword is just not as interesting as Spider-Man with a very good kick.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me because, the reason Spider-Man punches and kicks so much is because he's not necessarily trying to kill anyone. So it seems like giving him a sword kind of defeats that purpose a little bit.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah. And I guess this is a sort of thing that I've definitely wrestled with for the entirety of the podcast, is just being like, oh, and you get a bonus for not killing people, yada, yada, yada. But like D&D, it's fine to like kill people. There's like wolves and like big monsters that eat babies and stuff like that,
And, roadside travelers that aren't doing anything, but maybe have something good that you could use.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to be a highwayman, I mean, you can definitely be an evil version of a Daira character. That was an initial struggle with a lot of these sort of early brews that I did over the years, is that, just basically just trying to keep things like divorced from lethality. Like, because in D&D, it's pretty easy to not be lethal. You can just say, okay, I deal non-lethal damage. This has to be an entire campaign based around that, Because like most villains are just like, hey, I'm going to stab you until you die. And you have to be like, no, I'll block your attacks and knock you out. Which is totally viable too. You don't do less damage non-lethally than anything. It's just that D&D as a morality case, a lot of people fall in the pitfalls of morality, but like if there's ghouls and ghosts running around, you can slash a dude. There's a definitive afterlife. They'll be fine.
I mean, it's not like you should feel bad about killing a ghost since it's already dead.
Yeah, exactly. Ghosts want to die. They have unfinished business,
Yeah, exactly. So go ahead and kill ghosts is the moral of this podcast.
Exactly. Freaking bust those ghosts wide open. So yeah, let's just get into the kind of powers and break it down. So the first ability for monks you unlock is at level 3rd. Level 3rd. So the first ability... The first ability you get with the monk subclass is at the 3rd level. You discover mystical wrist garments from your order that channel your ki into the astral webs that weave the fabric of the arachnality. The astral webs empower your ki abilities in the following ways. While using Step of the Wind, you gain a swinging speed, a flying speed. There's a few different Step of the Winds that give you flying speed. By swinging on webs attached to the invisible anchor points of the arachnality everywhere on all the planes. It's just basically video gamey talk for just like, your web attaches to a certain point so you don't have to worry, because there's not a lot of verticality in most fantasy settings. If there's like a 2-story house, you can swing on like an invisible magic point, I felt like I made the magic webs instead of like, hey, you have to, at every short rest, you have to spend.
I think that's a good balance too, because like as much as like trying to get like everything realistic and immersive and stuff like that, sometimes it can kind of take away from the fun if you're spending all your resources doing the things you need to get the stuff to do the cool stuff instead of just like doing the cool stuff.
Yeah, I respect people for, doing grimdark campaigns, like really taking care into like, the effort that it goes to doing fantasy things. But magic is real and things are fine, People could chill out a little bit. It's
fantasy, so if your fantasy is to do the grim, realistic stuff, like you could do that. And if your reality is, oh, I want to do some cool Spider-Man stuff, you can do that too.
Exactly. Speaking of cool Spider-Man stuff, your astral web shooters give you a few different abilities. Basically, what I want to do with this first range of abilities, this first range of features, is just to empower all the power to empower the many abilities that a monk already has and just add webs to them. So yeah, when you use deflect missile, It's basically like the classic, just sort of kung fu movie thing, not unlike Kung Fu Panda 2, of catching a thing and reflecting it back at someone. The classic Spider-Man move is just like hitting a projectile with your web and swinging it back around. So when an ally gets hit you within like your range of movement, so it scales as you level up. Also, scaling abilities is always fun. So all of these are based around your range of movement instead of just like 30 feet set and dry. You can be more of a support character by using Deflect Missile for your allies as well, which I think will work out very well. When using Patient Defense, that's the least used monk ability. It's just a bonus action dodge, which is just disadvantage on people. But as Spider-Man, the classic thing is blinding someone with web. So if they miss an attack while you take the dodge action, you basically blind them and then they have to use a bonus action to take off their face. There's no, maybe in playtesting we'll realize that, maybe we should have like a saving throw, quote unquote, or something like that. But just ruining like your enemy's action economy by making them use a bonus action to basically cure themselves of blindness is a very good idea. And Flurry of Blows. I didn't want to make anything too overpowered, so they could just use a Flurry of Blows to blind another enemy instead of, doing an extra unarmed attack. Though people will always just do an unarmed attack because punching is good. And monks get to do extra punches. A lot of subclasses have like another little addendums to sort of feature. So also at 3rd level, the arachneality has altered your body to inhuman levels of strength and perception. You use your wisdom modifier in place of your strength modifier on athletics checks and saving throws. Yeah, that's a pretty normal monk thing to use wisdom for like jumping and attacks and stuff. But I also thought, hey, you might as well throw in saving throws as well because, you have empowered strength and you can have strength as a dump stat, which is always a great feeling because other dump stats really bite you in the ass later on. With, what was Grug's intelligence, a -3?
Yeah. Yeah, the caveman wasn't very smart. So far, that hasn't really come back and hurt us too bad, but yeah.
Yeah, and a 21 strength really leveled that out or something.
He's all brawn, absolutely
he
no
can't
brain.
have a brain. He's a skull.
Also, literally, because he's a skeleton, so he's literally got no brain.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get into making player races as well, because having a Neanderthal skeleton was a big brain move for a small brain character. We'll get into that in a later episode. Also, you can spend 1 key point to reroll a dexterity or strength saving throw. Spider-Man dodges stuff well, so might as well just throw that in. Because key point economy is somewhat important for a monk, but unless you're doing stunning strikes, you end up with a lot of extra key points that you don't really end up using. Speaking of key points, we'll move on to the 6th level feature, Webs of the Spider. At 6th level, you find more versatility in the power of your astral webs. You can spend key points to use a bonus action, webbing techniques. Now, this is basically adds another option you can do for a bonus action instead of your normal, step of the wind, patient defense, that kind of thing. You can spend 2 key points to web a creature's ranged weapon within 120 feet of you to give them disadvantage. It's basically, if you're using firearms in your D&D campaign, which some people do, it's usually like a steampunky sort of musket kind of thing, but there's also a lot of rules for like regular rifles and automatic weapons. Spider-Man webs up the muzzle of the gun. Absolutely. Just sort of ruins it. I also think it's funny because if you're using a bow and arrow, you just web up somebody's hand to their arrow so they can't actually let it go, so they have to like tear it off. You could spend 3 key points to reroll an initiative roll. Spider-Man is very aware, and the spider sense goes off, and he has to like jump in the air and leap around. And if you do like a bad initiative roll, that kind of goes against like the character you're making. So I like to add an option to like just reroll things every once in a while. You can also spend 3 key points to warn a friendly creature of danger and give them the evasion skill, which I did spell wrong on here. Very cool. The evasion skill is for rogues and monks because they're very dexterous. They take no damage when having a successful dexterity saving throw. So giving that to somebody else seemed like a nice thing to do as a bonus action. By just shouting, no! Because nothing's more superhero than shouting no and reaching your hand out towards them. Honestly, Spider-Man trademarked that. So,
especially when they're like falling off of a building and he like jumps after them and says no.
Exactly.
I feel that.
I usually do a dexterity saving throw to take half damage on a fall. That's just a sort of homebrew thing I do. So it's also useful for that situation. Good call on that, Matt.
I mean, I guess that kind of gets back to like the verticality thing, where there isn't a ton of verticality usually in fantasy genres. So it's like,
Yeah, we'll cover that.
You're falling out of
Yeah.
the second floor story of the local inn.
Yeah, I don't want to bury the lead on the book too much, but we're also going to be working on verticality and encounters in later episodes.
Ooh.
Yeah. But before we get to that, in this episode, you can spend 4 key points to make a grapple check against their AC to disarm an enemy. Classic Spider-Man thing, web up a weapon and yank it out of their hand. That's what it's all about, a nice web yank. And this is a bit of a beefier one that I probably will have to balance in playtesting this. Spend 5 key points to web zip you and one other willing creature 5 feet to instantly go to an unoccupied space within 60 feet you can see. That's just basically a no damage thunder step you can do with 5 key points, which might be the most overpowered ability on this list. I'll definitely have to work on that, on wording that, and maybe you can't do in one other creature, but I like using movement in this game to like support an ally and like bring them somewhere they need to be, or like getting them out of danger. That's just a good feeling, just helping your friends. The real movement spell were the friends we made along the way of running away.
You can tell my play style, because when I first read this, I read it as like you zip to an enemy to go fight them instead of like zipping away a friend.
Exactly.
So I'm definitely a much more just like run in and fight things kind of player.
You grab a barbarian and put them closer to which is also fair as well. Hey, this is why we need 2 hosts. We need the 2 sides of the coin. A forever DM and a absolutely mad player with intelligence. -3 to intelligence. I honestly shouldn't let Grug talk at that point. I'm pretty sure
he just grunts at them.
Yeah. D&D stats are funny.
Gosh.
Speaking of D&D stats, no stats change at this next feature, but we're just going to move on with the segue anyway. Next up, we have the grip of the spider. At 11th level, the arachnality gives you an uncanny climbing ability. As we all know, monks can, the sickest part about a monk is that at like level 10, I think, might be level 8, you get to sprint up a wall and sprint across water. It's the best part of being a monk, and it's really sick shit. But you have to end your turn on the ground or else you like fall. That's like a lot of like features that Wizard of the Coasts do. They basically have like a lot of stipulation is just like, oh, you can jump like 80 feet in the air, but you have to be on the ground or else you fall, instead of just like, just let people fly, man. What do you like? You're a bear totem barbarian. Greg's a bear totem barbarian, and you can fly eventually. But you have to like end your turn on the ground or fall. And yeah, Wizard of the Coast is a little lame that way.
I can fly 80 feet in the air, but if I do, I'm going to fall from 80 feet in the air.
Exactly. Yeah, but barbarians can usually take that. So yeah, this grip of the spider, very simple thing. You can wall crawl and stick on the wall. And I also wanted to give at 11th level an ability to use while you're on the wall. So you can use like 3 key points to like grapple a guy and like drag him up to you and like stick him to the wall, Spider-Man Shattered Dimension style. Absolutely my favorite moves to do as Spider-Man Noir is just bat a guy over the head and stick him to a wall. Or you can always choose to just let him fall and see if he can take the hit. Which is, yeah, you see a lot of my preferences in this book is with melee damage, verticality, and dropping guys. There's several features where you just drop somebody and just have like fall damage because like it's okay, it's like a few d10, but yeah. And finally, we have the final feature of the monk. A lot of subclasses are a little bit trickier to homebrew for because some subclasses end features at like level 12 and others end at like level 20. So yeah, just making just like an insanely overpowered final 20th feature is sometimes challenging, but I think I found a good one with Spidey here with Sense of the Spider. At 17th level, you can now sense when danger is coming and warn your allies. Even though you may not know what the exact danger is, your natural intuition gives you and other friendly creatures within your movement awareness for 1 plus your wisdom modifier to initiative rolls and dexterity saving throws. So yeah, everyone around you gets like the spider sense a little bit, Also at 17th level, you can now use web techniques as a reaction instead of a bonus action. You can do one technique as a bonus action and another technique as a reaction, but you cannot use the same technique twice in a round. So yeah, that's a little bit just sort of, I wish I could have like worded that a little bit better. It's like pretty like, blunt, like, hey, don't you do it. Don't you abuse this, because there's not really anything in D&D that lets you like use a reaction, a bonus action, and a turn. There's like a few things in Star Wars 5e, which is a whole nother beast that I'm not ready to homebrew for or even play, really. It's a lot more complicated. That's why I'm making this book for sci-fi D&D stuff. But you can throw a grenade, and there's like bonus action reaction in Star Wars 5e, I think, and all that kind of fun stuff. But yeah, that's your Spider-Man monk. I think it turned out really well. I think there's one or two typos, which is probably the minimum amount of typos you'll see in my initial posts. So full warning on that. But yeah, check this out on patreon.com/vmearcana.
Yeah, I like it. If we ever do like a superhero D&D run, I got dibs on this one.
All right. So. We like it. We like it or we don't like it. That's the rating curve on this. And you can let us know if you liked it or not at vmearcana@gmail.com, patreon.com/vmearcana to read the PDF yourself and give your thoughts. Or you can review the show, or you can just keep it to yourself, okay? And you can comment on any other homebrews you want to see or any questions you have about tabletop gaming in general. We'll also cover that in due time. In other episodes, we will do about one or two or three subclasses per episode, but since this was the epic first episode, we did a lot of explaining up top and then not a lot of content, which is a good tiding for things to come. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to Matt Easdale for co-hosting this episode.
Yeah, for sure. Always glad to just D&D as a wonderful pastime that you should definitely try and pick up if you desire to do so. It can be intimidating at first with all the rules, but once you kind of get into it, it's a lot simpler than it can seem at first glance.
Exactly. All we're doing is making it complicated, but it is quite simple once we start playing.
Exactly.
As we say at the end of every episode.
See ya.